Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will get started for this morning's webinar called European Perspectives on Social Impact Assessment Practices and Challenges in France, Sweden, Spain, and Portugal. My name is Lydia. I'm the head of the impacts team at Avise in France, and so I will be moderating this webinar as well as sharing the French perspective. This webinar is brought to you by BIRDS, which is the name for our consortium of our 4 countries. We are a consortium of National Competence Centers for Social Innovation, or the acronym NCCSI, which I'll use. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the National Competence Center for Social Innovations, it's an initiative of the European Commission since 2020, wherein each European member state has a designated NCCSI. And these centers have several key missions, which I'll present briefly before we get into the heart of our topic today. So several key missions for our NCCs: developing the ecosystems skills in social innovation, in particular through resource centers, promoting social innovation in each country, so for each of our countries that we represent, and of course, drawing on the European Social Fund to do so. Networking with social innovation stakeholders, pooling, sharing expertise, sharing tools, resources, fostering synergies, directing these actors towards dedicated funding streams, including the ESF as well as others, supporting the scaling of proven social innovations and how to do so, contributing to the design and improvement of public policies, supporting social innovation, and enabling connections, exchanges, meetings, and cooperations at a European level. Within this role of National Competence Centers for Social Innovation, the NCCSIs group together into various consortia in order to work more actively and more concretely on projects on various aspects related to social innovation. One of these consortia is the BIRDS consortium, which we comprise today. So the BIRDS consortia is comprised of Avise, the Avise Agency for France, the Forum for Social Innovation in Sweden, Portugal Social Innovation for Portugal, and the Ministry of Social Rights, Consumption, and the 2030 Agenda in Spain. From 2024 to 2027, the BIRDS Consortium will be working collectively on several topics, one of which is social impact assessment that we'll speak about today. Throughout 2025, these are our other various topics that I already presented. So just a bit of context: throughout 2025, throughout last year, our consortium worked on our first sort of deliverable on the social impact assessment topic, being a project where each of us mapped out in a report, mapped out our social impact assessment practices, ecosystems, methods, stakeholders, funding streams, various other aspects, everything that includes a social impact assessment ecosystem in each of our countries, using a shared framework, of course. And based on that shared framework, we each conducted a sort of national mapping, which ended in a report. And then we drew on all 4 of these national reports to conduct a transnational comparison and analysis, finding what are our commonalities, our shared realities, as well as where we diverge, and most importantly, identifying the areas in which we need further exploration, further work, areas in which we see that there are opportunities for cooperation, collaboration between our countries, but also, beyond our countries as well. And that is the object of our webinar this morning. We would like to share with you the results of our findings, but in particular, share those results in a way where we're really exploring those key areas for further exploration and cooperation. What are the big picture issues that we found in each of our countries that we would like to share and work on at a European level? So we have a few questions for each of our panelists and for myself that we'll share from each of our national perspectives and discuss, bounce back off each other in terms of those main issues. And then we'll have about 20 minutes at the end of our webinar for your questions and for discussion with all of you as well. Because we're in a Zoom webinar format, if you would like to ask questions or propose a reaction or a comment to any of our panelists or to all of us, you'll need to do that in the Q&R section of Zoom if you're not familiar. The chat section of Zoom is for introducing yourselves or saying hello to each other, and the Q&R section is really for the questions for us. So feel free to ask your questions throughout the webinar as we go. And we will keep an eye on those. And then when it comes to the questions time at the end of our section of our session, will field your questions. And if you have any heated questions during the webinar, if you have any clarification questions, things that are unclear, issues with sound or anything like that, of course, please let us know. So really quickly, the shared framework that I mentioned, the shared framework for our national reports, just so that you know what we looked into in our national reports and mappings. First, we delve, of course, into the cultural, historical background of impact assessment in each country, how it came to be, as well as various terms that are used. And on that, I will just say a note that the language for our webinar this morning, we will be using social impact assessment as our terminology, but of course, sometimes we might mix with the term evaluation or measurement. Each country might have their own slightly different meaning behind these various terms, or the terms in their native languages, of course, but often the terms are used interchangeably. So we might do so. That's a little word on vocabulary, but in general, we will use the term social impact assessment. Our second content area for our reports was about actors, so stakeholders and actors involved in social impact assessment in each of our countries, and of course the way that they're involved in social impact assessment, on what aspects are they working and how. And that includes, of course, public actors, ESF managing authorities, funders or financial actors, consultants, academic or researchers, project owners and innovators or entrepreneurs themselves, various other networks, groups, etc. We have as well delved into, of course, the methodology used for impact assessment, the tools, the various approaches, and the practices among various actors in each country, and the debates around methods and tools therein, of course. We have studied the aspect of funding, what funding sources exist for social impact assessment, and how that fits into the greater funding structure for social innovation more generally. The limits and barriers to funding, of course, and how that plays out in the development of social impact assessment in each country, and we've shared resources. All of our national reports, as well as the transnational comparison, are available on Avise's website, and we will put the link in the chat quite quickly so that if you want to consult the reports, please feel free to do so. That is available on our website. So now that I've introduced a little bit about what we're going to do today, I would like to officially welcome my co-panelists. So you see me at the end. I'll be hosting and speaking for France, and I'm joined this morning by Josephine for Sweden, Laura and Barbara for Spain, and Luisa for Portugal. Thank you so much for being here with us for this webinar. I will now share our screen because we were hoping to really limit the use of PowerPoint this morning and have more of a lively discussion between all of us. So to start, our first question and area that we would like to get into is, of course, this aspect of sort of historical context or background, that we set the stage for all of you as to how social impact assessment is being practiced in each of our 4 countries. What we found in our reports is that all 4 countries share a general sort of common historical trend regarding the practice of social impact assessment. That trend being that the practice initially shows up within the world of philanthropy in the 1970s around. Then in the 1990s, we have another moment of sort of evolution where there's a cultural shift towards more performance management in the public sector, increasing pressure to improve accountability in the public sector, and efficiency in public spending or expenditures. And this sort of cultural shift and this new context really led the way as well to an increased attention and development of evaluation practices, public policy evaluation, but also other types of evaluation practices, mainly in the public and nonprofit sectors, in addition to the philanthropy where it was already being practiced. And then more recently, if we look at the last 10, 15 years or so, various European norms, such as the CSRD, SFDR, have started to arrive, have started to be discussed quite greatly. There's a focus on accountability and responsibility for investors and classic enterprises or economy. There are international frameworks such as the UN's SDGs, which have been around for quite a while, which are paving the way. More and more conversation about, of course, green transition, Green New Deal, et cetera. All of this, which also contributes to an increased use of the term impact and increased conversation around extra financial accounting and various other practices of impact data reporting. So this is our shared sort of framework. But that being said, each country has undergone, of course, its own distinct process of how social impact assessment has become generalized, has evolved or become more developed in their country, as well as how it's become institutionalized or not, and by whom. So our first round of questions I would like to ask each of you is, how has your specific institutional context in your country shaped the ecosystem and approach of impact assessment? And which policies or programs have sort of most affected impact assessment in your country and its accessibility? And to do so, we'll start with Josephine for Sweden.
Thank you. I would like to start by saying that we have a fairly long history of impact evaluation of public policy in Sweden. The first examples actually were documented as early as in the 1950s, where major school reforms were being evaluated and the impact were looked upon. But the first big wave was, as you mentioned in your introduction, Lydia, when the political reforms that led to the new public management within the public sector in late 1980s, early 1990s. And here, evaluation was an important tool of governments by increasing the pressure on efficiency and goal steering and performance management and so forth. Another important way for impact evaluation culture in Sweden was the introduction of the evidence-based practice within the social services that was promoted by the National Board of Health and Welfare in the late 1990s. Impact evaluation or impact assessment within this context is defined as research conducted with the aim to support professionals in making well-informed research-based decisions in which interventions to provide for their clients. So this movement made Sweden one of the countries where research-driven impact evaluation became a norm within social services. And the evaluation approach here was very rigorous, and the one that was most reliable within the sector was randomized controlled trials, RCTs. I would also like to mention the Swedish Managing Authority, the ESF Council, as well as the Swedish Agency for Economic and Regional Growth, who has historically been two of the main funders of evaluations in Sweden during the last 20 years. And they have, to a large extent, influenced the practice. There was a new approach from around 2010. It was often referred to as ongoing evaluation. It was not really impact evaluation, but it has a clear focus on long-term effects and sustainable development. And it was like developmental oriented evaluation approach, where the evaluator provided ongoing input to a project by analyzing different factors and how they contribute to different results. And this era had a made a big focus on in evaluation in Sweden, and the authorities they funded a lot of trainings, courses, literatures in very close collaboration with universities, which built a lot of competence and experience in evaluation society in Sweden. And the last thing I would like to mention is the national strategy for social entrepreneurship and social innovation that the then Swedish government launched in 2018. And it prioritized social impact assessment to a large extent. And this strategy led to the development of different pilot models, self-assessment tools, as well as frameworks of impact assessment directed to NGOs. So this was an initiative where the impact assessment was placed on the national agenda outside the more traditional public services, which is very interesting.
Thank you so much, Josephine. I will ask myself the question for France and take the next step. So in France, the sort of origins of impact assessment are very closely linked with the social solidarity economy and the way that economy has become institutionalized. And so there's a sort of a parallel evolution there. So the term in France, social utility, historically was used first, and that was a term that appeared in France as early as the 1970s. And it was used as a condition for tax exemption for nonprofit organizations. And so there was already this sort of link between a financial status or receiving public funding and having a social utility, or later would become the term impact. So there's already this sort of anchoring or root there. And the notion of social utility then became the basis for the social solidarity economy law of 2014. So in France, we have this law that has existed for now over 10 years, which defines a social solidarity economy enterprise or organization as, among other criteria, having a defined and intended social utility. And so that also further anchored this sort of identity as social utility or social impact being a defining characteristic and being a subject for regulation. And so from there, since the term social utility evaluation was used quite a lot in France, and then in around the 2010s, it started to turn into social impact as the terminology, which was also evolving in the sort of classic economy, and so the terms sort of merged there. And in 2011, the French Higher Council for Social Solidarity Economy set forward their own official definition of social impact, which therefore really rooted the importance of the practice for the social solidarity economy, set it forward as a priority for this ecosystem, and it also provided a common framework, a common sort of definition. So it's been institutionalized in this ecosystem, progressively for a while. And social impact assessment, as sort of we use the term or as we know it, has been largely, nearly exclusively practiced by the social solidarity economy in France, as opposed to other practices of evaluation that might be used in other disciplines or ecosystems. And this is mostly nonprofits, but can include social enterprises or other types of organizations. And this also, again, is really linked to as well the sort of external or institutional motivations in terms of securing funding, obtaining that status of an SSE enterprise legally, or sort of general external communication. The standard of the ecosystem has sort of been set that way. And I will say that in the SSE ecosystem, beyond the sort of regulatory or funding motivations, in France, the focus really is a lot on the capacity to innovate, on continued learning, on processes, looking at processes more than just looking at sort of outputs. And so social impact assessment has also evolved in that direction, and the way that it is used in order to improve processes. And then that's accelerated. The practice of social impact assessment has accelerated in France over the past, again, 10 to 20 years, and each year sort of exponentially so, with a general professionalization of the social solidarity economy and specifically nonprofits. There's been a sort of a general increased focus on project performance or sort of performance issues and project management and therefore data collection, and so that has further pushed a sort of technical as well development of social impact assessment in France. And I'll stop there and I'll pass the microphone to Barbara, who will speak on the Spanish context.
Thank you, Lydia. Nice to be here. The Spanish context is very similar to all of you, and we have seen as different actors rise in different times, and the national approach has evolved in a progressive and fragmented manner over the time of the last 25 years, particularly the last 25 years. There have been at least three main levers, I would say. First, a regulatory and institutional framework with several milestones that I will relate now. A second one is the key ecosystem builders that have made a social innovation and impact assessment ecosystem thrive for the last 10 years, more or less. And finally, institutional commitment to pilot projects with experimentation portfolios. And the three combination of those levers have made the impact assessment initiatives and an ecosystem flourish. So first, the milestones. So we had early in the 2007 until mid of the century, 2017, a state agency for evaluation in public policy, which was a key milestone for public policy based on evidence. And we had different laws and royal decrees that afterwards in 2022 had tried or are pushing the institutionalization. So this framework is key to understand how policy based in impact are key in Spain. And so several ones. Related to the you were mentioning also the social economy. It has been also key in the last years, decades, and there's an important recent Spanish strategy that urges entities to measure their impact. So there's a national framework that is favorable, that is nice, that is good for social impact measurement. Second, the thriving of the social impact assessment ecosystem and social innovation ecosystem. Key actors like S-Impact from the Social Value Network, or Spain App from the GSG, or the Social and Solidarity Economy Networks, and a network of evaluation professionals in 2024, and the Observatory 2025, think tanks and communities of practice from universities like ours. So this ecosystem is being key to institutionalize as well the assessments. And finally, as I was saying too, the experimentation this commitment with pilot projects that are making very visible that it is needed to base policies and projects in evidence. And well, I would say these main levers have made the ecosystem in Spain flourish. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And to end, Luisa for Portugal.
Thank you, Lydia. So in the case of Portugal, our approach to the social impact assessment was shaped by a proactive, coordinated institutional context led by the creation of Portugal Social Innovation in 2014. And so this initiative marked a pioneering step as Portugal became the first European country to mobilize European funds exclusively for social investment, and so making social impact evaluation a mandatory component of funded projects. So this strong role of public actors in deploying outcome-based funding models such the social impact bonds has also institutionalized evaluation as an integral part of financing social innovation. And of course, furthermore, the development of a national strategy that is called Agenda for Impact 2030 has established a clear framework and raised standards for impact evaluation across the public, private, and also social economy sectors, promoting outcomes-oriented approaches and an evaluation-based culture. At this stage, also foundations and corporate actors have also incorporated evaluation requirements into their grant making, so enhancing accessibility and embedding impact assessment more broadly. And the institutional ecosystem also includes academic and research institutions that provide the foundational methodologies and also the capacity building programs supporting the professionalization and also the scalability of the impact evaluation nationally. So Portugal has this trajectory that is a combination of this strong public leadership, the integrated of funding models with embedded evaluation, also support strategic frameworks and the emerging capacity building infrastructures that has facilitated broad accessibility and progressive institutionalization of social impact assessment in alignment with European norms and global agendas. So I think that at this stage, there are the main points. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avise. Our next question and set of presentations concerns the topic of methods, which is of course a hot topic regarding social impact assessment. So without getting into very specifically the sort of the details of methodologies and tools used, our general sort of one general finding that we had across our reports was that there's really a shared pattern in our countries, which is that for social innovation projects, the methods and the tools used are really theory-based approaches or logic models, and mixed methods, meaning quantitative and qualitative methods for data collection. These methods are really used are oriented around accessible or relatively accessible data collection tools and logic models such as the theory of change, which is perhaps the most kind of universal tool that we found across our countries, quantitative surveys, qualitative interviews, these sort of bedrock methodologies. And the main drivers behind the choice of methods were really, of course, the availability of the methods in terms of the financial and human resources necessary to conduct the data collection using those tools, and the need for results which are conducive to learning for the innovation process, and therefore choosing the methods based on what is really the needed or intended goal, rather than the burden of scientific proof. More robust, or what are considered more scientifically robust methods like counterfactuals, like SROI, social return on investment, these are often hailed by institutional actors, by academic actors as being gold standard for this type of methodologies. These are in fact much less, or even rarely used in all of our countries by social innovation actors, for one, due to the financial, the financial constraints that they pose, but also the technical difficulty, the fact that it requires an external, consultant or someone to conduct the methods, as well as, again, that need for learning, and those not always necessarily being the methods that are best adapted to that. So what we found across all four of our studies and our countries is that the approach by social innovators, by entrepreneurs, their approach to impact assessment is this slogan that the Portuguese came up with, which is good enough now, robust later. And that this slogan encapsulates really our sort of collective approach to social impact assessment. In each of our countries, we also saw that there is a debate about whether this good enough now, robust later approach will remain the approach, or whether it's a stepping stone towards more robust. Is that robust later part, in fact, inevitable and desirable? And so the question that I'll now open up to the floor is, to what degree is more methodological rigor in social impact assessment desirable and necessary for the long-term development of social innovation? Or in other words, are the current practices in terms of social impact assessment sufficient to the needs of innovation, or do we need to push to go towards more rigor, to go towards more technical practices? So we'll draw upon our own sort of examples, but also the debates that are ongoing in each of our ecosystems. And we'll start with Barbara for Spain.
Thank you, Lydia. Well, I have another mantra or slogan, no? Enough precision for the decision, no? Which for Social Value International is key. So on our perspective, as you were saying, so the level of rigor depends on the objective served by the measurement or the assessment, no? It can be for accountability, for learning, but also depending on the existing conditions, resources, capacity, time, etc. So it depends. And also the British famous economist John Maynard Keynes said, "I would rather be vaguely right than precisely wrong." So this is what should move us. From our perspective, the most important thing is to develop a culture that fosters impact-informed decision-making in order to maximize impact. This is better than obsessing over the rigor of the methodology to be used. So additionally, the rigor has also has to do with how we design assessment, how we listen to stakeholders. So this is also robust, how far we go there. So RCTs as experimental methodologies, of course, they are rigorous and they can be useful, and they are useful for certain projects, for certain phases of social innovations, to identify causality, so to see if there's a direct relation between the intervention and the results or the impact. But they are not always suitable. They are not suitable for identifying changes in narratives, in culture, or in outcomes related to systems change. So, and social innovation has a lot to do with all this. They are not so much useful to understand the social value created for stakeholders in a wider way. So our think tank that includes large companies, social enterprises, non-profits, public administration, investment funds, proposed to have a clear body of solid and shared principles like social value principles and standards, shared frameworks that can be the SDGs, that can be a theory of change, and then, only then, builds a mixed, flexible toolkit of methodologies to choose according to the needs and combine them as needed all over the time of the project. So the use of different methodologies can be mapped out from the outset to inform decision-making in each phase while maintaining adaptability and robustness. So for us, this is the main point. So I think if it helps in the discussion.
Thank you so much. I'll take the next step and agree with Barbara, and I think the phrase "enough precision for the decision" is also very apt for the French context. Generally speaking, over the past 15 years or so, social entrepreneurs and nonprofits in France have increasingly used more structured, more methodical impact assessment practices or tools. That being said, it's all relative. It remains, we remain far from something like a counterfactual. But that evolution has gone from over the past 15 years or so having a practice of really output reporting, maybe some satisfaction surveys, things like that, to having, different types of data collection, outcome data collection, having workshops, trainings on social impact assessment, trying to integrate, the collection of a few indicators a year, and then every few years having a full sort of impact assessment process take place. So there is a general trend towards more structured or mature practices. However, this is mostly the case for larger projects or larger organizations with a certain level of maturity or age rather. Smaller projects or mid-sized projects, especially nonprofits, and projects that are in an incubation phase or within their first few years of existence, have much less practice of social impact assessment. In some cases, it's beyond the resources that are available. In some cases, there's an active resistance or confusion about social impact assessment being a type of reporting that is done for our funders and isn't useful for the project. And so that can create some cultural blockages as well for projects. But the focus historically for the social solidarity economy has been, the focus for the sort of actors in the ecosystem has really been on increasing accessibility of the existing practices rather than forcing or pushing the ecosystem towards more rigorous, robust methods. Over being important over everything else. The goal has really been to encourage, promote impact assessment, saying that if it's sort of simple methods, simple indicators, that's much better than nothing, and setting in place a practice that can evolve over time, one brick at a time, and specifically trying to kind of demystify some of the intimidation that can be felt towards impact assessment, feeling that it's too technical, it's too complex, it's too scientific, it's inaccessible, and rather the effort from Avise, but also other actors in the ecosystem has been to sort of say the opposite and try to really encourage projects to embark on the process. That being said, the goal, I think, for us is really about finding the middle ground, which is, again, this enough precision for the decision is great. That middle ground being, what is the type of data collection or the type of impact assessment practice that allows the project to improve, allows it to reinforce its relationships with partners, with stakeholders, allows it to make sure it's really aligned with the initial social needs, all of the things that social impact assessment exists for. How to find that middle ground between something that allows that to happen without being too complicated, but not being unsatisfactory either. And I'll just end with saying that the current context in France with really large government budget cuts means that this move towards more robust, more complex methods is likely even farther away, is likely to not happen in the immediate future. The idea is really to try and protect and maintain practices as they are, despite having less resources. There is an ongoing debate about how useful, about moving towards monetary methods, specifically as a way to advocate during a context of budget cuts. But that is also a sort of philosophical debate in the nonprofit sector in France, sometimes being seen as contrary to the philosophy of nonprofits as being, not wanting to reduce impacts to monetary or economic dimensions. And I will end on that, and I will pass it to Josephine.
Thank you. I will continue with the statement made by Barbara, I think, about the objective or purpose of the evaluation is key in this discussion. And I would say that to a certain extent, projects and policymakers or finances have different needs of what they need to know from the evaluation. Our study of Sweden shows that certain sectors have a clear push toward robust assessment methods. One example is the development of evidence-based practice that I mentioned earlier within the social services in Sweden. Also, in other policy areas, the demand for more standardized methods are being pushed for, such as the National Audit Office, who have introduced quality standards focusing on counterfactorability, statistical justification, and methodological transparency within the evaluations. But at the same time, evaluation researchers within Sweden debate whether this strict impact evaluation approaches is even possible when it comes to evaluation of social interventions, and more so within social innovation. It is an appealing idea that to be able to use impact assessment as a means to show that an intervention works or innovation works and generate reliable, solid knowledge for both the social entrepreneur and the financer. But when it comes to social innovation, there is a large risk of what we refer to as the impact problem. I mean, a prerequisite for impact assessment is that the intervention has to remain constant throughout the measurement period in order to be able to determine that it was the intervention and nothing else that caused the impact. However, actors in social innovation often emphasize that their process is characterized by experimentation, iteration, and interactive learning between different actors from different sectors. And that's an important part of achieving social change. So ensuring that the intervention is the cause of that change is particularly challenging in this landscape, I would say. There is an evaluation approach called realistic evaluation. I think it was developed in the US. And there is argued that to be relevant to decision makers, an evaluation needs to investigate more than just whether the intervention works or not. Instead, the evaluation should explain what works, under what circumstances, and for whom. There is an evaluation researcher called Pawson and Tilley, and they have argued that evaluation should therefore generate context mechanism outcome statements. So a combination of evaluation designs appears more valuable when evaluating social innovation. And I would say that RCTs and high rigor impact assessment approaches could often be misaligned with the very nature of social innovation. At the same time, we need to talk about how we label different forms of evaluations. In Sweden, we have seen many examples of evaluation that claim that they have measured impact while not living up to basic standards of what constitutes impact evaluations. So a more common language and common definitions is needed to describe different approaches and what conclusions that can be drawn from them. So a combination of showing and explaining change with scientifically proven methods at the same time making it accessible and possible for more actors to use, I would say.
Thank you, very much agreed. Thank you. And Luisa.
Thank you so much, Lydia. So in Portugal, really, our practice of social impact assessment, it's good enough now, robust later, dynamic, which means the majority of social innovation initiatives, they start to employ theory-based approaches, such as a theory of change, combined with mixed methods that include surveys, interviews, focus groups, tools that are accessible, and they also provide qualitative context and facilitate outcome measurement without excessive complexity. So these methods enable organizations to capture meaningful impact data within their current capacity constraints and resource availability. So these more scientifically rigorous methodologies, such as counterfactual designs or the social return on investment, are relatively rare and are typically reserved for mature programs at scale or interventions that present high stakes of policy adoption or expansion. So the selective use of these methods, there are ethical costs and feasibility considerations acknowledged in the Portuguese context and reflecting the pragmatic approach to balancing this rigor with operational realities. Of course, that the ecosystem recognized the value of methodological rigor, but also emphasized the proportionality, which means adopting more complex and resource intensive evaluation techniques only when justified by scale, by decision making needs, or even available evidence systems. So, this stage approach to evaluation allows social innovation projects to build foundational measurement capabilities initially and then progressively increase sophistication in evidence creation as they mature. So the current evaluation practices are generally regarded as sufficient to meet the immediate needs of many projects, especially in this early age or when addressing complex systematic social challenge where outcomes emerge over longer timeframes. Nonetheless, there is a strong aspiration within Portugal's social innovation ecosystem to enhance evaluation quality, supported by capacity building initiatives and also institutional frameworks such as Agenda for Impact 2030 that promote this continuous improvement and adoption of robust methodologies when appropriate. So, in conclusion, the Portuguese approach is pragmatic. It employs proportionality guidance by using these accessible tools like theory of change, the service, and so on, to foster this continuous learning and manage costs during the experimental phases of social innovation. And the rigor is then escalated to causal or evaluating methods for major projects seeking substantial scaling, validation, or even policy integration, addressing the needs of investors and policymakers. And this challenge remains closing the capacity and funding gaps to ensure that more projects can reach the phase robust later. And I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. Moving on to the next question. Our next question concerns scaling of social impact assessment. And I'll explain what I mean by that, which is that, for all of us, for each of our countries and each of our reports, something that we noticed was that there is a real need and a push in each of our countries to move from a practice of kind of micro level assessments, meaning that assessments are done really at a project level or even a program level, a program meaning within a project level. And that there's a need to really move towards more meso level, meaning conducting assessments at a sector level, at a regional level, at a sort of thematic level, collective level, or even moving towards a macro level, meaning at a national or international assessment. And there are, of course, some examples, but in general, this is something that continues to need to be developed farther, especially if we want to have the kind of hard-hitting evidence, the sort of evidence that leads to better advocacy in terms of the impact of social innovations. And this is not an easy shift, and so there's a lot of questions about how to get towards the shift. But these types of assessments could really be interesting and important at demonstrating the more systemic changes that can be created by social innovation within the idea of cooperations, but also within the idea of social innovation as a model or an ecosystem and how that sort of creates systemic change. So what I would like for us to each explore is whether there are, existing practices or examples already emerging in each of your countries that do sort of that are experimenting assessments at a meso or macro level, and how that's working, and what you believe is needed within your own context context within your own country or at a European level, what you think is really needed for us to be able to continue that evolution towards more meso or macro impact assessment practices. And I will turn to Josephine for our first answer.
Sorry, I didn't find the button for the microphone. If I start by talking about what is already emerging, I will like to tell you about a movement that has been going on the recent years within the Swedish Institute of Standards, where 26 different organizations from different sectors have collaborated over a 3-year period on the development of how to assess social and environmental impacts in a more practical way. For example, by actors within social enterprises, projects, and other public organizations. The work has resulted in a standard that was launched last year. And it consists of a terminological section that provides a common vocabulary and a process description on how impact assessment can be carried out. And this is developed together with a methodological guidance to complement this standard. And the guidance aims to bridge the gap between the ideal impact assessment in strictly scientific terms and the practical context in which many of these actors are operating. I would also like to mention our managing authority, ESF in Sweden. They have made a move and have more focus on macro level evaluation than previous years. They argue themselves that they have raised the quality on evaluations in recent years. They have higher requirements early in the stage of tenders, where the tenders have to justify the methodological considerations, they have to make relevant operationalizations, and they have to give a detailed motivation on which empirical data that will be used and how it will be collected. And it's only in the tender stage, which gives a better quality when the evaluation is being carried out. The tenders must also present a strategy for learning in the recipient organization. And in addition, they have a higher competence requirements that have been placed on the evaluating teams by having at least one recognized expert within the field, usually a researcher. Of course, I also would like to mention our competence center in Sweden. We are currently developing a model for social impact assessment of social innovations funded by the ESF Plus. And we're doing that in a close dialogue with the authority. The model aims to measure value and impact on the individual level, as well as on the macro level. So this is something that we will be developing during this year together with the authority and developing indicators on how to capture this value and impact. And we will actually also be testing it by projects within the authority, by the funded projects. And what we believe is needed for further development, we would say, and I think all of you agree, that we need more long-term or dedicated funding streams for evaluations. When we did a follow-up on social enterprises, many of them consistently report lack of resources, lack of personnel, difficulties in reaching target groups, and stable and long-term funding. So we think that that would allow evaluation models to follow entire portfolios and thematic areas or ecosystem rather than single interventions. We also argue that we need more strengthen the multi-sector partnership for learning and evaluation involving universities, public agencies, social enterprises, and intermediaries. Such collaborations also should enable shared methods and joint indicator set and cross-sector learning. So, and we already have existing initiatives around this, but I would like to see an even closer cooperation with the universities, both within the field of social innovation, but also in evaluation research.
Thank you so much, Josephine. Definitely agree. I will say quickly for France that there are certain emerging practices, of course, moving towards a more meso level. I will say with a disclaimer that given our government budget cuts, this sort of shift is likely to be slowed down, just in the sense that, as Josephine mentioned, it does require, more resources as well sometimes. But there are certain approaches, and specifically one approach that I would like to share is what the sort of the French call the approche territoriale, which would be a local collective approach to impact assessment. So this could be a collective of actors either working in the same sector or working on the same social issue or working at a municipal or regional level, usually regional is too large, but really at a local level, working in social solidarity economy or social innovation together at a local level that engage in a social impact assessment together. So that can involve either a common training or workshops with actors in order to establish certain tools or practices together, identify needs, or create a local level theory of change that is the same theory of change shared among actors. And that could be actually conducting, pooling resources, pooling sort of strategy as well to conduct an impact assessment as several actors, which is a very interesting way to as well pool resources. There are various ways to go about it, but the goal is really to create a shared sort of collective dynamic to impact assessment and also to measure what collective actions produce in terms of impact. So that can be one or the other or both, in terms of the impact assessment itself is done collectively, but also it can assess the impact of collective actions. And one example I'd like to share really quickly is the city of Strasbourg in France, where the municipality has launched a program, a project, where they have hosted and financed a group of training sessions on impact assessment for both local social enterprises, nonprofits, and all types of structures, and local elected officials to do together. And so the advantage of that is, of course, to have a common ground with these local elected officials, but also to align expectations, needs, really establish a shared vision and to move forward together. And they're working now or thinking now about perhaps establishing a sort of a local shared theory of change for the social solidarity economy, being what are they contributing to together in terms of change, and a feasibility study to look into whether a set of shared standardized impact indicators could be measured by all of these participating social solidarity enterprises in the municipality area, meaning that everyone would collect a few of the same shared indicators, and then that data could be consolidated, analyzed, and shared with local officials to produce very interesting advocacy storytelling points in defense of social innovation at a more meso level. So there are examples like this which are really inspiring and could be scaled, more regionally or nationally as we get there. So there is a promise of having more weight in demonstrating really the proof of social value of a certain model of projects or organizations and convincing the decision makers. And that seems to be really a key success factor is involving those local officials, involving decision makers, involving public-private financiers, and using that to further the scaling. And I will stop there and I will hand it over to Luisa.
Thank you, Lydia. So, while social impact evaluations in Portugal are mainly micro level, There is a clear recognition of the importance of scaling these practices to the meso and macro levels to effectually capture system change driven by social innovation. And I can point out some of them. So, the public funding streams with outcome based designs. So, I can indicate, for instance, the partnerships for social innovations that embed mandatory results indicators and report obligations, and also social impact bonds, the further integrate evaluation by linking public payments to measured outcomes in the priority domains like social protection, employment, and so on. Also, the institutional and system level resources, for instance, the development of national methodology guides and frameworks, such as those produced by PlanApp, that is the National Center for Planning, Policy, and Foresight Competences, that establish common standards facilitating comparability and coherence across projects and sectors. And of course, the National Competence Center for Social Innovations that has developed platforms like One Value, with the aim to consolidate evaluation methodologies and data, helping to integrate also project level research for broader systemic insights. And other topic, the collaboration partnerships and sector activities, like I mentioned before, this collective work that established the impact agenda. It was pointed out that there is a need to ease the reporting burden and enable this learning for investors and public commissioner. And these cooperative approaches encourage the alignment between funders, implementers, and evaluators, promoting this scalable impacts measurement beyond individual projects. Finally, the evaluation plans for national strategies provide this evaluation framework focus on social innovation programs at the community and territorial levels, aiming to assess both social and economic impacts comprehensively. So this ecosystem is increasingly foster meso and macro level impact assessment in Portugal through these integrated outcome-based funding mechanisms, also the national framework that standardize these methodologies, and partnerships that really encourage sectoral indicator alignment. And for now.
Thank you. And Laura will end for Spain.
Okay, thank you very much, Lydia. Well, as for Spain, as Barbara mentioned before, in the last years, there are different public administrations that have promoted social innovation with a portfolio approach to inform public policies. So this portfolio approach is considered essential by some international organizations like the OECD for managing public innovation in complex contexts. So I try to explain briefly what this portfolio approach is. So instead of limiting innovation to isolated and disconnected projects, in a portfolio approach, you manage simultaneously a set of interconnected projects that are all oriented toward a common mission. So with this approach, you can act strategically because you have one mission to achieve. You can balance risk because in the same portfolio, you can balance some disruptive projects with others that are safer. You can also foster collaboration among different actors, different projects. You can learn from the whole instead of learning from the results of each project. You can see the whole. You can observe how different interventions work in the territory. So you can know, as Josephine said earlier, you want to see what works, what doesn't work, and in which circumstances. So you can have this overall perception of the whole perception of what is happening in the portfolio, and also see the gaps, the duplications, the patterns. So it's a very important knowledge that increments the value of the research, and also facilitates the process of transfer and scaling. So with this approach, let me talk about two examples that has happened in Spain in the last years. So with this approach, two different ministries have led innovation portfolios to tackle or to address complex societal challenges. These both portfolios has occurred at the same time between 2022 and 2024 with different methodologies, but they are both examples of this approach, of this portfolio approach. So on the one hand, the Ministry of Inclusion has launched the Inclusion Policy Lab, which brought together 34 projects with one mission: to improve social and labor inclusion for people with in situation of economic vulnerability. So in this portfolio, different actors collaborated in the projects. So third sector organizations, autonomous communities that are the regions in Spain, also municipalities, and also they have the support of academic institutions for to do the impact assessment of the projects and of the portfolio. So these 34 projects were evaluated with a randomized control trials. So they have two groups, one intervention group and one control group, to test how different inclusion pathways work. So what works, what doesn't work, and in which circumstances. So all the lessons that they obtain from this lab has been synthesized in a set of recommendations for inclusion policy design that are included in a report titled Levers for Inclusion. So that's that's one example, and the other example is the portfolio approach led by the Ministry of Social Rights. So this ministry has launched the Vidas platform that integrated 19 projects. So Vidas platform is conceived as a space for sharing knowledge and co-creating collective learnings. So these projects of Vidas platform were led by 143 third sector organizations in different regions of Spain. And they had a shared mission. The mission was to promote the institutionalization, so to transform our care system from an assistentialist system to a person-centered and community-based model. Unlike the policy, the Inclusion Policy Lab, in this case, they didn't have a common evaluation methodology, but each project had different methodologies to evaluate impact. But the results were analyzed jointly. So it was possible to extract 179 findings that are now included in a report that is Innovation Portfolio, New Community-Based Care Models. So I think, in short, these are good examples of how public administrations can support social innovation with a portfolio approach. So they can generate a greater impact, they can strengthen sustainability of innovations, and then they can facilitate the scaling up of these innovations.
Thank you, Laura, for those examples and of the policy approach, portfolio approach. Very interesting. And that leads quite nicely into our next question, which is around public policy and evidence-based policy. This is something that we also explored in all of our national reports, being that there is a sort of cultural ideal around evidence-based policy and data-informed policy making or design. But despite these sort of discourses, the use of data, and specifically the use of impact assessment evidence or impact results in actual day-to-day policy decision making, is much more unclear. How and when and if all of that is taking place. And for most of us, generally speaking, there was a finding that it was that relationship between impact results and policy design or decision making is unsatisfactory, is lacking. And this gap between those two elements can and does exacerbate the feeling that many social entrepreneurs, nonprofits, social innovators can feel that there's this burden on them to conduct impact assessments, to mobilize resources, to collect data, etc., not knowing how that data is going to actually be used to further policy, not knowing whether that data is really going to influence those sort of giving the orders behind the impact assessments. So what we'll discuss now is whether in each of our countries there are existing mechanisms, practices, examples that do connect the results of impacts to policy design, to policy decision making, how that works, and what you as well feel is still lacking, or what needs there are, conditions there might be that would help to reinforce that relationship between impact results and policy decision making. So I will let Luisa open.
Thank you, Lydia. So in Portugal, this gap between the ideal evidence-based policy and its actual implementation, it's evidence, particularly within the public sector engagement with social impact evaluation. So although impact assessment has become more widespread, challenges remain in systematically using evaluation results to inform public decision making and strategic learning, and how this gap manifests. So the public sector has shown relatively slow progress in adopting social investment recommendations and embedding evaluation culture compared with other ecosystem actors. A 2018 monitoring report indicated that public entities lagged behind in implementing outcomes-based approach and result-oriented contracting, highlighting a need for capacity building in evaluation competences among public administration, which has been done for the last 2 years. Also, the complexity that is inherent to social innovation policy, with these diffuse, long-term, and many times context-dependent outcomes, make all of these evaluation and impact evidence very difficult to do. And there is a need for these mixed and often qualitative evaluation approaches that further complicates these timely and actionable insights for policy. And there is a reliance on these ex post evaluations to allow sufficient maturation time for impacts. But this is retrospective. Timing can limit the immediate policy responsiveness and learning. So the moving to the existing mechanisms that link evidence to impact, I will just name a few. For instance, the evaluation findings from key national instruments like partnerships for social innovation or social impact bonds, they are incorporated into public reporting and grant management practices where result reports serve both as accountability and also learning functions both for the funders and for the policymaking. And I will also point out some opportunities to better use impact assessment evidence policy. So strengthening public sector evaluation capacity through continued and expanded training initiatives. So these public officials have skills to commission, interpret, and also apply impact evaluation in policy decisions. There is also this opportunity to enhance systematic follow-up of evaluation recommendations to ensure that insights translate into concrete policy adaptations rather than simply reporting outcomes. Also, the incorporating mixed methods, participatory and systematic evaluation approaches more times to capture complexity and produce this knowledge that can inform policymaking at different levels. And just to conclude that Portugal has established these foundational structures linking impact evidence to public policy, but these gaps remain in embedding evaluation culture within the public sector and systematically translating these results into decision making and addressing these capacity constraints and promoting this learning mechanisms and use of comprehensive evaluation approaches, we think that are the key pathways to narrowing this gap and realize evidence-based policy informed by social impact assessment results.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Josephine, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I will take it very short since I see that we are running out of time. But my best example, as mentioned before, is the development of the evidence-based practice within the social services within Sweden. And now we have a new Social Services Act that came into force in July last year. And the act entails a move toward even more knowledge-based social services where activities are conducted in accordance with science and proven experience, and where systematic evaluation are needed to apply on all areas on social services. So that's a very good example. And another is the National Audit Office that I mentioned earlier, who have introduced quality standards on evaluation of economic policy interventions. And something that is interesting to note here is that they made a follow-up on this, and they looked at 37 different evaluations within the sector. And it showed that the criteria often is exceeded practical capacity. Only 2 out of 37 evaluations met the criteria. And many of the ones that did not do that were still used as proof for different policies. So this is important, not only to put pressure on the methodology of evaluation, but also to raise the awareness and competence of the policymakers on how to use evaluations and what conclusion that can actually be drawn from these approaches. I think I will stop there.
Thank you, Josephine. I will also go very quickly for the sake of time and just say that there is an example in France that is interesting to mention, which is the territories with no long-term employment initiative, the Territoire Zéro Chômeur de Longue Durée. And this is an initiative that started around 2011, I believe, and has had several waves of evaluation, but essentially, following, there was an initial evaluation of the project in around 2014, and the results from this evaluation were really used to form arguments and advocate with public officials, which resulted in anchoring or establishing the experimentation in a law that was passed with unanimity with that was passed unanimously by the National Assembly in 2016. So there's a really direct relationship there. And then that happened again in 2020 with further evaluation results resulting in a unanimous passing of a law in front of the French National Assembly. And the evaluation results really spoke to the social impacts as well as the cost-benefit dimensions of the program. And so they were really crucial in proving the kind of viability for the project, and including the scalability, because now the project is in about 83 different communities in France, and so it's really been able to scale. And the evaluation was a part of that, and it's actually has scaled internationally based on a dedicated ESF call. Again, all of which these sort of data points were crucial to. And what I would sort of say is that, what I think is really interesting and important here is the way that the evaluation results and data on social economic dimensions were used to establish strong narratives, were used to establish arguments that were then used in strong relationships with public decision makers, the way that those arguments were crafted and spread, and how that then led to actual policy. And I think that is really a crucial area for us to explore in France, but I imagine at a European level, is how are we crafting those arguments? The data is a tool that serves a greater mission, and how are we really crafting those arguments? How are we building relationships with decision makers and building those arguments? And I think that's really the important thing that I would put forward in that example. And what I would suggest is we'll end with Laura for Spain. We had a last question, a last sort of round that we were going to discuss European cooperation, but we are probably not going to have time for that. So we'll end with the Spanish example, and then if we have a minute left, we can speak about European cooperation. And if there are any questions that you would like to ask, please do so in the Q&R at this time. If we can go over for 5 minutes or so. All right, Laura, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lydia. Yes, I'm going to be really brief because we are running out of time. So just to mention, I work for a public administration. So in the case of public administrations, the connection between the results of innovation and the decision making is easier to make. So just to mention, in the two examples that I explained before, in the case of the Inclusion Policy Lab, they are now starting a new phase of this lab. They are scaling up some of the good practices they identified in the previous phase in other contexts. So they are implementing these good practices in a territory of the south of Spain, in Doñana. And the mission here is to improve the living conditions of vulnerable people in 14 municipalities of this region. And for the Vidas platform, I'm not going to give you more details because we don't have the time. But regarding the Vidas platform, all the lessons we learned from this innovation portfolio has been used or have been translated to inform the state strategy for a new care model. For example, in this case, all the lessons we learned about community care, autonomy, inclusive technology have served to design this strategy, and also all the lessons from the portfolio have demonstrated that this new model is feasible, and that's really important. So we can demonstrate, we can do it, we can go for it, because we have demonstrated with our portfolio approach that it is feasible. And also all the lessons from the Vidas platform has been used or have been included in the draft law to reform the dependency and disability legislations. So all we have learned about assistive technologies, community care, personalization, or the institutionalization have been largely incorporated into this draft law. So just to conclude that it is important, I think that public administration promote these innovation portfolios as a kind of public policy labs to inform, to generate evidence of what works and how we have to do things, and to allow to design the design of evidence-based policies. So that's I just give you 2 minutes for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lara. Yes, we have gone over. So I see no questions in the chat or the Q&R. So maybe what we can do with the last 2 minutes is each of us can speak for a few seconds on our last question. Our last question was really about the need for developing and reinforcing further cooperation among European countries, and this is really goes back to the mission of the BIRDS Consortium, but the other consortia and the community of practice and social innovation in Europe. But that there's really this need for cross-sectoral, cross-institutional, cross-country cooperations to develop various needs related to social impact assessment. And so maybe we could each just say 2 words on the areas that we see that are interesting for those types of European cooperations, and then we will say thank you to all of the participants. Thank you so much for being with us this morning and for listening. And I will say just in 2 seconds for France, I will just highlight, I think, really that idea about impact storytelling and narratives, and how that relates to public policy design, to public funding or private funding, but how that really relates to decision making on a systemic level, and how we use impact as a tool for those narratives, but amongst other tools, amongst other types of information. And I think that there's a lot that can be learned from each other at a European level. I think there's a lot that we can do to build those practices together. So I will say that for my part, and I will open the floor to anyone else who wants to say a word about that topic.
I can continue if you like, Lydia.
Please.
I would go for the opportunity to build together or to continue developing a digital infrastructure that is interoperable and that improves the quality of the data. So to reinforce, to foster all your meaning. So this is a European opportunity to do it together. Thank you very much.
Barbara.
If I have to choose one, I would say that we need to have a shared European language on this, shared definition and a shared understanding of different evaluation approaches and what conclusions that can be drawn from it. And I would also like to see collaboration on the development of relevant indicators, both on micro and macro level for social innovation, for national comparisons, where we involve the academia and relevant researchers.
Thank you, Josephine.
To add what already has been said, because all of has been said before, we also agree that is very important for the future. To think how we can develop a shared, proportional, evaluation principles that could fit different project sizes and stages. That would also be very important for us, along with capacity building that I think we have. All of us have reached this conclusion that it really is important to keep building this capacity, and especially among the public sector.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We are at 11:02, so I will say thank you so much, Josephine, Barbara, Luisa, Laura. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing with all of us. And thank you to all of our audience members for listening. And please feel free to get in touch with any of us if you'd like to learn more, read our reports on Avise's website, and follow further projects by Birds. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.